in a small Oregon town called Ashwood. Former military officer Jessica Kane finds herself battling a ruthless criminal network led by Victor Greaves. When Victor's gang threatens the town and its people, Jessica uses her military skills, the loyalty of her trained pack of dogs, and the courage of the townsfolk to fight back. From a daring warehouse raid to a climactic battle in the town square, Jessica proves that determination and unity can triumph over even the darkest forces. But as Victor is captured, Jessica discovers that his network is part of a larger operation, and the fight is far from over. What did you think of Jessica Kane's journey? Are you watching from the US, Europe, or somewhere else? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to DG Story for more gripping stories like this one. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring these adventures to life. The crisp morning air hung over the small town of Ashwood. Nestled deep in the forests of Oregon, Jessica Kane, a woman in her mid-30s, adjusted the straps of her weathered backpack as she stepped out of her modest cabin. Her sharp eyes scanned the horizon, her instincts always attuned to the slightest changes in her surroundings. Years of military service as a special forces operative had left their mark on her, not just in the scars on her skin, but in the careful, deliberate way she moved, as if anticipating an unseen threat. Ashwood was the kind of place people moved to when they wanted to disappear. Its population barely reached a few hundred, and the forest seemed to swallow everything in its thick embrace. For Jessica, it was perfect. After leaving the military, she sought isolation, haunted by the loss of her closest companion, Max, a loyal K-9 partner who had died saving her in a disastrous mission overseas. The pain of that day still weighed heavily on her, a constant reminder of the cost of duty. Jessica wasn't completely alone. Over time, she had formed a bond with a pack of stray dogs that roamed the edges of Ashwood. Aries, the alpha of the group, was a German Shepherd mix with piercing amber eyes that seemed to understand her better than most people. The others, Luna, Bolt, and a few younger strays, had slowly come to trust her. They were her family now, a reminder of the life she had left behind but could never fully escape. As Jessica moved toward the forest, the familiar sound of paws crunching against the leaves followed her. Aries and Luna flanked her like silent sentinels, their movements fluid and purposeful. Jessica carried fresh scraps of meat in her pack, a daily ritual that had earned her the unwavering loyalty of the pack. But today, something felt off. The forest was unusually quiet, the usual chatter of birds and rustling leaves conspicuously absent. Jessica's sharp instincts kicked in. Her hand instinctively moved to the knife strapped to her thigh. "Stay close," she murmured to Aries, her voice barely audible. The German Shepherd's ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. Luna mirrored his reaction, her body tensing as her sharp eyes scanned the undergrowth. Jessica slowed her pace, her eyes narrowing as she spotted something unusual through the trees. About 50 yards ahead, 3 figures were moving, men dressed in dark clothing, carrying heavy bags slung over their shoulders. From the way they moved, Jessica recognized them immediately. These weren't hikers or hunters. Their deliberate steps, their alert postures, this was a group that knew how to operate under the radar. She crouched low, blending into the shadows of the forest. Aries and Luna stayed at her side, their bodies taut with anticipation. Jessica watched as the men approached a hidden clearing. There, a black van waited, its doors wide open. The men quickly offloaded the bags, revealing the unmistakable glint of firearms and metallic crates. Her stomach tightened. "This isn't a hunting trip," she whispered to herself. The sight of the van's license plate caught her attention. It was covered with mud, a deliberate attempt to obscure its identity. Jessica's military training kicked in as she mentally cataloged the scene. 3 men, possibly armed, transporting illegal goods. The question was, why here? Ashwood was a quiet, forgotten town. Whatever was happening, it wasn't good. Suddenly, one of the men froze, his head snapping toward her direction. Jessica's heart pounded as she pressed herself lower into the underbrush. Someone's watching. The man growled, his hand moving toward the pistol at his side. Jessica signaled to Aries with a subtle hand gesture. The dog stayed perfectly still, his amber eyes locked on the man. Luna crouched lower, her tail barely twitching. The tension in the air was palpable as the man scanned the forest. Jessica's grip tightened on her knife, ready to act if necessary. "Relax," another man said, his voice gruff but dismissive. "It's probably just some animal. Let's move." The group loaded the last of the crates into the van and drove off, their tires kicking up dirt as they disappeared into the forest. Jessica exhaled slowly, her muscles unwinding slightly. She motioned for Aries and Luna to follow as she crept toward the clearing. The faint smell of gasoline lingered in the air, mingling with the metallic scent of the crates that had been left behind. Amid the disturbed earth, Jessica spotted something they had dropped. A small backpack, its zipper slightly open. Inside, she found maps, a ledger filled with coded entries, and photos of men she didn't recognize. One thing was clear, whatever operation this was, it wasn't small. As she stood there, piecing together the implications, Aries let out a warning growl. Jessica's pulse quickened as she turned to see a shadow moving through the trees. One of the men had come back. "Let's go," Jessica whispered, grabbing the backpack and retreating into the forest. The man's voice echoed behind her, sharp and angry. "I saw something. Someone's here." But Jessica and the dogs were already gone, vanishing into the dense undergrowth. The silence of the forest was shattered that night. Jessica was awakened by the unmistakable sound of tires crunching gravel near her cabin. She moved quickly, her instincts honed from years in the military. Quietly, she whistled to Aries, her lead dog, signaling him to stay alert. Peering through the blinds, she saw the glow of headlights cutting through the darkness. 3 black SUVs stopped just outside her property. Shadows emerged, 6 men, heavily armed, wearing dark clothing. The patch on one of their jackets caught her eye, a snarling wolf, the insignia of Victor Greaves' organization. Jessica's chest tightened. They had found her. The men spread out, scanning the area. One of them, clearly the leader of the group, gestured toward her cabin with a cold, sharp motion. "She's here. Burn it down," he ordered. Jessica's jaw tightened. She couldn't let them destroy her home or harm her dogs. Her mind raced as she considered her options. Her cabin, though modest, was built with defense in mind. It was surrounded by traps she had set long ago, motion-triggered flares, spikes hidden under leaves, and cans strung with wires to create noise. The first man stepped onto her property, his boot triggering a tripwire. A bright flare exploded in front of him, illuminating the dark woods. "What the hell?" he shouted, stumbling back. Jessica didn't waste a second. She silently signaled Aries and the rest of the pack. They moved like shadows, surrounding the intruders with low growls that sent chills down their spines. "What the dogs?" one man exclaimed, his voice shaking. The leader turned to him, furious. "Get rid of them. They're just animals." But these weren't just animals. Aries lunged first, taking down one man with precise force. Luna and Bolt followed, their coordinated attacks forcing the others into retreat. Jessica emerged from the shadows, her rifle trained on the leader. "Call them off," he shouted, backing away. Jessica's voice was calm but firm. "Leave now, and you might walk away. Stay, and I'll make sure you don't." The leader hesitated, his bravado faltering under her unyielding gaze and the sight of his men being overwhelmed by the pack. "Fall back," he finally yelled. The remaining men scrambled to the SUVs, their retreat hasty and chaotic. As the roar of engines faded into the distance, Jessica lowered her rifle. She knelt beside Aries, running a hand through his thick fur. "Good boy," she whispered, but her relief was short-lived. They would be back, and next time, they wouldn't underestimate her. The next morning, Jessica packed a bag and headed into town. She needed answers and reinforcements. The air in Ashwood was tense. The recent activity of the gang leaving the locals uneasy. At the local diner, she found Sam Carter, a young man who had been quietly gathering information on the gang since they had destroyed his family farm. He was sitting at a corner booth, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "Sam," Jessica said, sliding into the seat across from him. He looked up, startled. "Jessica? What are you doing here?" "They found me last night," she said bluntly. "I need to know what you've got on them. Where's their base? What are their next moves?" Sam hesitated, glancing around before leaning in. "Victor's got a warehouse deep in the woods. It's where they store their weapons and other things. I overheard some of his men talking about it at the tavern last week." Jessica nodded, her mind already formulating a plan. "You're coming with me," she said. "What? No, I'm not." Sam trailed off under her steely gaze. "You want to stop them, don't you? This is your chance." Sam swallowed hard and nodded. "Fine, but if we're doing this, we need to move fast. They won't sit idle for long." Jessica placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Then let's get to work." The stakes were rising. Jessica knew that to protect herself, her dogs, and the town, she needed to take the fight to Victor Greaves, and she couldn't afford to fail. Jessica stood in the clearing behind her cabin, the crisp morning air carrying the faint scent of pine. Her hands moved deftly as she secured tripwires, reinforced barriers, and positioned her makeshift traps. Sam was nearby, struggling to hammer stakes into the ground. "This is a lot," Sam said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Do you really think all this will stop them?" Jessica glanced up from her work. "It's not about stopping them completely. It's about slowing them down, disorienting them, making them think twice before moving in." She tightened a wire and motioned for Sam to continue. The traps were simple but effective. Smoke bombs triggered by tripwires, spike strips hidden under leaves, and cans filled with stones tied to trees to create a cacophony of noise. Every detail was calculated, each trap part of a larger plan. Jessica whistled sharply, and the dogs gathered around her, their eyes alert and focused. Aries, the alpha, stood at attention, his tail stiff and his ears perked. Luna, the swift and nimble hunter, paced with restless energy, while Bolt, the cautious guardian, sat quietly, his intense gaze fixed on her. "All right," Jessica said, crouching down to meet their level. "You all know the drill." She led the pack through a series of commands, using hand signals and whistles to guide them. Aries responded immediately, leading the group in a coordinated movement around the clearing. Luna practiced stealth maneuvers, darting between obstacles, while Bolt tested defensive positions, his growls a low warning to any imaginary intruders. Sam watched, wide-eyed. "How do you get them to do that?" Jessica smirked. "Patience, trust, and a lot of training. They're more than just dogs. They're a team." He nodded, clearly impressed. "I hope I'm half as useful as they are." "You will be," Jessica replied, her tone softening. "But you'll need to stay sharp. These traps and the dogs will only buy us time. The rest is up to us." That evening, Jessica and Sam sat around a small fire outside the cabin. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. "I've been thinking," Sam began hesitantly. "Why are you doing this? You could just leave, get out of Ashwood, disappear. They wouldn't find you." Jessica stared into the fire, her jaw tightening. "I've been running for too long," she said finally. "After I lost my team, and Max, I thought I could hide from the world. But danger doesn't just go away because you ignore it." She looked at him, her expression resolute. "I'm not going to let Victor and his men destroy this town like they've done to so many others. If I don't fight back, who will?" Sam nodded slowly, his respect for her growing. "You're braver than I am." Jessica shook her head. "Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about standing your ground even when you're scared out of your mind. Her words hung in the air, a quiet reminder of the battle they were about to face. The next morning, Jessica checked her weapons and supplies: a scoped rifle, a few handguns, a reinforced baton, and a bag of improvised explosives. She handed Sam a small knife and a lightweight crossbow, showing him how to use them. "This isn't a fair fight," she warned. "They've got more men, more firepower, but we've got the advantage of knowing the terrain. Stay close, follow my lead, and remember the plan." Sam nodded, gripping the crossbow tightly. "Got it." Jessica whistled, and Aries trotted to her side. She knelt, running a hand over his fur. "You ready, boy?" she whispered. Aries' steady gaze and wagging tail were all the reassurance she needed. The pack assembled, their energy palpable. They seemed to sense the importance of what was to come. Jessica took a deep breath, her mind racing with possibilities. "Tonight, we hit the warehouse," she said, her voice firm. "We destroy their supply chain and send a message. They'll know we're not afraid, and we're not backing down." With that, Jessica, Sam, and the pack moved into the forest, their figures melting into the shadows as the sun dipped below the horizon. The fight was coming, and they were ready. The moon hung low in the night sky, its pale light barely penetrating the dense canopy of trees. Jessica and Sam crouched behind a cluster of thick bushes, the faint hum of machinery and muffled voices reaching their ears. The warehouse loomed ahead, a large, weathered structure surrounded by stacks of crates and rusting equipment. 2 armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their flashlights cutting through the darkness in lazy arcs. Jessica leaned close to Sam, her voice barely a whisper. "Remember the plan. Stay low, stay quiet, and don't engage unless you have to. Let the dogs and the traps do the heavy lifting." Sam swallowed hard and nodded, gripping the crossbow tightly. Jessica signaled with a sharp whistle, and Aries led Luna and Bolt toward the far side of the warehouse. The dogs moved silently, their dark forms blending seamlessly into the shadows. One of the guards paused, his flashlight lingering on a stack of crates. "Did you hear that?" he muttered, nudging his companion. Before the other guard could respond, Aries lunged from the darkness, his powerful jaws clamping down on the man's arm. The guard screamed, his flashlight tumbling to the ground. Luna and Bolt followed, their precise, coordinated attacks taking down the second guard before he could raise his weapon. Jessica and Sam moved quickly, stepping over the incapacitated men as they slipped into the warehouse through a side entrance. The interior of the warehouse was dimly lit, the air heavy with the smell of oil and gunpowder. Rows of crates lined the walls, many marked with the symbol of Victor's organization. A small group of men stood near the center of the room, their voices low as they discussed a shipment schedule. Jessica scanned the area, her eyes locking on a stack of crates labeled explosives. She tapped Sam's shoulder and pointed toward them. "That's our target," she mouthed. As they crept closer, one of the men glanced toward their direction, his brow furrowing. Jessica froze, her hand tightening around her rifle. But before the man could investigate, a sudden crash echoed from the far side of the warehouse. Jessica smirked. Aries and the pack had triggered one of the diversion traps she'd set earlier, a pile of metal tools deliberately placed to create a loud clatter. "What the hell was that?" one of the men shouted, grabbing a flashlight and heading toward the noise. The others followed, leaving the explosives unguarded. Jessica and Sam hurried to the stack of crates. She pulled a small satchel from her bag, its contents a mix of homemade explosives and fuses. "Cover me," she whispered, handing Sam a handgun, as Jessica worked to rig the explosives. Sam kept his eyes on the warehouse floor, his hands trembling slightly as he aimed the weapon. "Hurry up," he muttered, his voice tight. "Almost there," Jessica replied, her fingers moving with practiced precision. Just as she finished, a voice rang out behind them. "Hey, who the hell are you?" They spun around to see one of Victor's men standing a few feet away, his gun already raised. Jessica didn't hesitate. She grabbed a wrench from a nearby workbench and hurled it with incredible accuracy, striking the man in the face. He dropped his weapon with a grunt, clutching his nose as he stumbled backward. "Let's move," Jessica shouted, grabbing Sam by the arm. Jessica whistled sharply, signaling the dogs to regroup. Aries, Luna, and Bolt appeared moments later, their fur slightly matted but their energy undiminished. The sound of shouting and boots pounding against concrete grew louder as more men flooded into the warehouse. Gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off metal beams as Jessica and Sam sprinted toward the exit. "Detonator!" Sam yelled, his voice panicked. Jessica pulled a small remote from her pocket, her thumb hovering over the button. "Not yet," she said, her eyes scanning the area for any remaining obstacles. They burst out of the side entrance just as a group of men rounded the corner, their guns trained on them. Ares launched himself at the nearest attacker, followed closely by Luna and Bolt. The chaos bought Jessica enough time to hit the detonator. A deafening explosion ripped through the warehouse, the shockwave sending crates flying and engulfing the structure in flames. Jessica shielded her face from the heat, pulling Sam behind a stack of debris for cover. When the dust settled, the warehouse was reduced to smoldering ruins. The remaining men, dazed and disoriented, stumbled away into the forest, their morale shattered. Jessica knelt beside Ares, checking him for injuries. "You okay, boy?" she murmured, relief flooding her voice when she found no serious wounds. Sam sat nearby, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. "We did it," he said, a mix of disbelief and triumph in his tone. Jessica nodded, her expression grim. "This will slow them down, but it won't stop them. Victor won't take this lightly." She looked out at the burning wreckage, her mind already racing with the next steps. The battle was far from over, and Jessica knew the fight was about to get even more dangerous. The faint orange glow of the burning warehouse still lingered on the horizon as Jessica and Sam returned to the cabin. The pack moved silently alongside them, their senses sharp. The forest felt heavier now, as if holding its breath for what was to come. Jessica had barely stepped through the door when her phone buzzed. She pulled it from her bag and saw an incoming call from an unknown number. Her instincts screamed caution, but as a familiar voice crackled through the line, "Vic." "Well, Jessica," he drawled, his tone mocking. "You've been busy. I have to admit, I underestimated you. That won't happen again." Jessica's grip on the phone tightened. "You've made your last mistake, Victor. You should have stayed out of Ashwood." Victor chuckled darkly. "Oh, but I'm just getting started. You've got something of mine, and I intend to get it back. Let's see how tough you are when your precious little town is reduced to ash." The line went dead. Jessica turned to Sam, her jaw clenched. "They're coming. We don't have much time." Sam's face paled. "How many?" "Enough to burn this place to the ground," she replied. Jessica wasted no time. She grabbed a map of Ashwood and spread it across the kitchen table. "We need to warn the town and set up defenses. If we let them march in unopposed, this place is finished." Sam nodded, determination flickering in his eyes. "What do you need me to do?" Jessica circled several key locations on the map. The main road leading into town, the local diner where many of the townspeople gathered, and the central square. "You go to the diner. Tell anyone who will listen what's coming. I'll head to the square and rally whoever's willing to fight." Ashwood was quiet when Jessica arrived in the town square, the dim streetlights casting long shadows on the cobblestone streets. She rang the old church bell, its sharp peal echoing through the empty streets. One by one, the townspeople emerged, their faces weary and apprehensive. Jessica climbed onto the steps of the church, her voice steady but urgent. "Listen up," she began. "Victor Greaves and his men are coming for Ashwood. They're armed, dangerous, and they won't stop until this town is nothing but rubble. But we don't have to let that happen. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some looked scared, others skeptical. "Why should we fight them?" An older man called out. "We're not soldiers. We're farmers. Shopkeepers." Jessica stepped down from the steps, meeting the man's gaze. "You're also fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters. This is your home. If you don't stand up for it now, who will?" A young woman in the crowd spoke up. "What can we even do against them? They've got guns, trucks, everything." Jessica nodded. "They have numbers, yes, but we have the advantage of knowing the land. I've set traps, prepared defenses, and I'll fight alongside you. With your help, we can stop them." After a tense pause, the crowd began to stir. One by one, people stepped forward, offering whatever they could: tools, vehicles, and their own resolve. By dawn, Ashwood had transformed into a fortress. Jessica directed the townspeople to barricade the main roads with overturned trucks and reinforced fences. She placed spike strips at key choke points and hid smoke bombs in strategic locations. The townspeople worked tirelessly under her guidance, their fear slowly giving way to determination. Sam returned with news from the diner. "The locals there are in," he said breathlessly. "A couple of them even brought hunting rifles." Jessica gave him a tight nod. "Good. We'll need every hand we can get." The sound of engines shattered the calm of the early morning. Jessica stood at the edge of the town square, her rifle slung across her back, Aries at her side. The pack waited nearby, their muscles coiled with tension. The first wave of bikers appeared, their motorcycles rumbling like distant thunder. Behind them came 2 black trucks, each bristling with armed men. Victor himself stepped out of the lead truck, his expression smug as he surveyed the town. "Jessica Kane," he called out, his voice carrying across the square. "Let's not drag this out. Hand over what's mine, and maybe I'll let these people walk away." Jessica stepped forward, her gaze icy. "You've already taken too much from them. This ends here." "Victor." Victor smirked. "Suit yourself." He raised his hand, and the first wave of bikers surged forward, their engines roaring as they charged toward the barricades. Jessica's whistle cut through the air, sharp and commanding. The first trap triggered, a burst of smoke engulfing the lead riders and sending them into chaos. The townspeople opened fire, their shots carefully aimed under Jessica's guidance. The battle for Ashwood had begun. Jessica knew this was just the start. The real test lay ahead, where courage and sacrifice would determine the fate of the town. Chaos erupted in the heart of Ashwood as the bikers charged forward. The sound of engines roared, gunfire cracked through the air, and shouts of determination and panic mingled with the sharp barks of Jessica's pack. Smoke bombs and improvised traps created confusion among Victor's men, but the bikers pressed on, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm the townspeople. Jessica crouched behind an overturned truck, her rifle trained on the advancing horde. Aries crouched at her side, his low growl a steady reminder of the danger ahead. She fired a calculated shot, hitting the tire of an approaching truck and sending it skidding into a barricade. Sam ducked behind a pile of sandbags, reloading his crossbow with shaking hands. A biker spotted him and charged, but before the man could reach him, Luna darted in, her speed and precision taking him down. Sam looked at her, breathless, and gave a small nod of gratitude before returning to the fight. Meanwhile, a group of townspeople led by the diner owner, Carl, held their ground at the eastern barricade. Armed with hunting rifles and pitchforks, they fought fiercely, their determination fueled by Jessica's leadership. "Keep them off the square," Jessica shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. From his position near the back of the battlefield, Victor watched the fight unfold with growing irritation. His men were struggling to break through the defenses, and the element of surprise had been lost. He turned to one of his lieutenants, a burly man with a scar running down his jaw. "Take the second truck," Victor ordered. "Flank them from the north. Burn everything in your path." The lieutenant nodded, climbing into the truck and leading a smaller group of bikers around the outskirts of the town. Jessica noticed the movement immediately. From her vantage point, she could see the second truck disappearing into the woods, heading toward the northern edge of Ashwood. "They're trying to flank us," she said, her tone grim. "Sam, you're with me, Carl. Hold the square." Carl nodded, shouting orders to his group as Jessica and Sam moved quickly toward the northern edge of town. Jessica and Sam arrived just in time to see the second truck barreling through the forest, flames already licking at the trees as the bikers set fire to the undergrowth. "They're trying to flush us out," Sam said, panic creeping into his voice. "Not if we stop them first," Jessica replied. She signaled to Aries and the pack, who spread out to intercept the bikers. The dogs moved like shadows, their speed and agility unmatched as they tore through the enemy ranks. Jessica fired precise shots at the truck's tires, forcing it to swerve and crash into a tree. The bikers regrouped, their weapons trained on Jessica and Sam. For a moment, the odds seemed overwhelming. Then, with a deafening roar, Aries led the pack in a full-on assault. The bikers faltered under the relentless attack, their formation breaking apart. Amid the chaos, one of the bikers managed to grab Sam, holding a knife to his throat. "Call them off!" the man shouted at Jessica. Jessica froze, her rifle aimed at the man's head. Aries growled, his body tense as he awaited her command. "Let him go," Jessica said, her voice cold and steady. The biker sneered, "Drop the gun, or he dies." Time seemed to slow. Jessica's mind raced, weighing her options. Before she could act, Sam made his decision. With a sudden, forceful movement, he drove his elbow into the biker's ribs, twisting free just as Aries lunged. The biker went down, but not before plunging his knife into Sam's side. Jessica's breath caught as she rushed to his side, catching him before he fell. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice tight with emotion. Sam managed a weak smile. "Figured it was my turn to save someone." Jessica pressed her hands against the wound, trying to stem the bleeding. "You're going to be okay," she said, her voice trembling. As the bikers retreated from the northern edge, Jessica carried Sam back to the cabin, her mind racing. Victor had underestimated her again, but she knew he wouldn't make the same mistake a third time. The townspeople had won this battle, but the cost was steep, and the fight was far from over. Jessica knelt beside Sam as he lay on the cabin floor, his breathing shallow. Aries rested his head on Sam's arm, his usually fierce eyes filled with quiet concern. Victor's voice echoed in Jessica's memory. "Let's see how tough you are when your precious little town is reduced to ash." Jessica looked out at the dark forest beyond the cabin. She wasn't just fighting for Ashwood anymore. She was fighting for everyone Victor's cruelty had touched, and she wouldn't stop until he was brought down for good. The night was eerily quiet, the type of silence that carried a foreboding weight. Jessica sat beside Sam in the cabin, her hands bloodstained from treating his wound. He had drifted into a restless sleep, his breathing shallow but steady. Aries and the rest of the pack lay nearby, their sharp eyes flicking toward every creak and rustle. Jessica's mind churned with plans and possibilities. Victor's forces were weakened, but not broken. He would regroup, and when he returned, he'd throw everything he had at Ashwood. She grabbed her rifle, slinging it over her shoulder, and headed outside. The air was crisp, the faint smell of smoke from earlier battles still lingering. In the clearing, she found Carl and a small group of townspeople, their faces lined with exhaustion but hardened by resolve. "They're coming back," Jessica said, her voice firm. "Victor won't stop until he's destroyed this town, or we destroy him." Carl nodded. "What's the plan?" Jessica knelt, drawing a rough map of Ashwood in the dirt. "We'll draw them into the square, where we've got the strongest defenses. They'll expect us to hold back, but we'll hit them with everything we've got." She looked up, her gaze sweeping over the group. "If any of you want to leave, now's the time. No one will blame you." No one moved, "We're with you," Carl said, gripping his shotgun tightly. Through the night, Jessica and the townspeople worked tirelessly to strengthen their defenses. Trucks and tractors were positioned as makeshift barricades, with spike strips hidden beneath piles of leaves. Smoke bombs and flares were rigged at strategic points, ready to sow chaos when triggered. Jessica took time to check on Sam, who was awake but pale. "You should stay here," she said softly. Sam shook his head. "I'm not sitting this out. You'll need every hand out there." Jessica hesitated but saw the determination in his eyes. "All right, stay near me. No heroics this time." By dawn, the town was ready. As the first light of day crept over the horizon, the distant growl of engines shattered the fragile calm. Victor's convoy appeared on the main road, a mix of motorcycles, SUVs, and a large armored truck that rumbled ominously at the rear. Jessica stood in the town square, her rifle at the ready, Ares at her side. The pack was positioned around the perimeter, their low growls echoing in the tense air. Victor stepped out of the lead SUV, his face a mask of cruel confidence. He clapped slowly as he walked forward, surveying the barricades. "You've put up quite the fight, Jessica," he called out, his voice carrying across the square. "But this is the end of the line. Hand over the documents, and maybe I'll let you and your friends crawl out of here alive." Jessica raised her rifle, aiming directly at him. "Not a chance." Victor smirked. "Have it your way." He raised his hand, and the attack began. The bikers surged forward, their vehicles crashing into the barricades. Smoke bombs erupted, obscuring their vision as the townspeople fired from cover. The traps worked perfectly. Spike strips shredded tires, flares disoriented attackers, and well-placed tripwires sent bikers tumbling. Jessica moved through the chaos with precision, firing calculated shots and directing the pack. Ares led Luna and Bolt in a coordinated attack, their speed and ferocity driving back wave after wave of bikers. Victor watched from the rear, his expression darkening as his men faltered. "Bring up the truck," he barked into his radio. The armored vehicle rumbled forward, smashing through barricades with ease. A mounted machine gun roared to life, forcing Jessica and the townspeople to retreat further into the square. Jessica ducked behind a stack of crates, reloading her rifle as bullets tore through the air. Sam crouched beside her, wincing as he clutched his side. "We need to take out that truck," he said through gritted teeth. Jessica nodded, her mind racing. "There's a weak spot in the back. If we can get close enough, we can plant an explosive." "I'll cover you," Sam said, his voice steady despite his pain. Jessica hesitated but saw the determination in his eyes. "All right, let's move." Using the chaos as cover, Jessica and Sam weaved through the battlefield, inching closer to the armored truck. Ares and the pack created a diversion, attacking the bikers guarding the vehicle. As Jessica reached the truck, she pulled a small explosive charge from her bag and placed it against the rear axle. She set the timer for 10 seconds and signaled Sam to fall back. "Go! Now!" They dove behind cover just as the explosion ripped through the truck, sending debris flying. The vehicle shuddered and collapsed, its machine gun silenced. The destruction of the armored truck sent panic through Victor's forces. Many of the bikers began to retreat, their morale broken. Victor, however, refused to back down. He stormed into the square, a shotgun in hand, his face twisted with rage. "Jessica," he roared, "face me, or I'll burn this town to the ground." Jessica stepped forward, her rifle lowered but ready. "It's over, Victor. Your men are gone. Surrender, and maybe you'll live to see another day." Victor sneered. "Not likely." He raised his shotgun, but before he could fire, Ares lunged at him, knocking him off balance. Jessica moved swiftly, disarming him with a sharp strike from her rifle butt. Victor hit the ground hard, groaning in pain as Jessica stood over him. "You've lost," she said coldly, as the remaining bikers fled into the forest. The townspeople began to emerge, their faces a mix of exhaustion and relief. Jessica secured Victor's hands with zip ties and turned to Sam, who was leaning heavily against a crate. "We did it," he said weakly, a faint smile on his lips. Jessica knelt beside him, her voice soft. "You did good, Sam. Now let's get you patched up." Aries nudged her hand, his eyes reflecting the loyalty and strength that had carried them through the battle. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ashwood was quiet. But Jessica knew this was only the beginning. Victor's capture would draw attention from the larger network behind him, and the fight for justice was far from over. The sun was beginning to set, casting warm hues over the battle-scarred streets of Ashwood. Smoke still curled from the remnants of barricades and the charred wreckage of Victor's armored truck. The townspeople moved quietly, clearing debris and tending to the wounded. Despite their exhaustion, there was a palpable sense of relief they had survived. Jessica stood at the edge of the square, watching as Carl and a few others rounded up the remaining bikers who had been too injured or too afraid to flee. Victor sat among them, his wrists bound, his once smug expression now a mask of defeat. Carl approached Jessica, his face lined with weariness but resolute. "What do we do with them?" he asked, gesturing toward Victor and his men. Jessica's gaze hardened. "We hold them until the authorities arrive. I'll call in a contact who can make sure they don't just disappear into the system." Carl nodded, though doubt flickered in his eyes. "You think they'll pay for what they've done?" "They will," Jessica said firmly. "This time, they won't escape justice." Jessica turned and headed back to her cabin, where Sam was resting. Inside the cabin, Sam sat propped up against a wall, his face pale but determined. Aries lay at his feet, his head resting on Sam's lap as though sensing his pain. Jessica crouched beside him, checking his bandages. "You should be in a hospital," she said quietly. Sam managed a faint smile. "I've had worse. Besides, I think Ashwood's hospital is wherever you are." Jessica snorted softly, but her eyes betrayed her concern. "You saved my life, Sam. Twice now. That doesn't go unnoticed." Sam's expression turned serious. "You've done more for this town than anyone ever has. If it weren't for you, we'd all be—" He trailed off, shaking his head. Jessica didn't respond immediately. She looked around the small cabin, the scars of the battle still fresh in her mind. "It's not over," she said finally. "Victor's just a piece of something much bigger. Taking him down won't stop the rest of them from coming after us." Later that night, Jessica contacted Captain Marcus Rivers, her old friend from the military. The call was brief but filled with purpose. She explained the situation, detailing the evidence they'd gathered and Victor's capture. "I'll send a team," Marcus assured her. "And Jessica, this isn't just about Ashwood anymore. What you've uncovered could blow the lid off a nationwide operation." Jessica's grip on the phone tightened. "Then you'd better make sure it counts." As the call ended, Jessica felt a strange mix of relief and dread. She knew the battle for Ashwood had been just one chapter in a much larger fight. In the days that followed, Ashwood began to heal. The townspeople worked together to rebuild the barricades and homes that had been damaged during the fight. Victor and his remaining men were taken into custody by Marcus's team, and the evidence Jessica had gathered was sent to federal authorities. Jessica, however, remained vigilant. She spent her days patrolling the forest with Aries and the pack, ensuring that no remnants of Victor's gang lingered nearby. One evening, as she returned to the square, she found a small gathering of townspeople waiting for her. Carl stepped forward, holding a crudely made wooden plaque. "For you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Jessica took the plaque and read the carved words. "To our guardian, Jessica Kane." Jessica's heart swelled with a mix of gratitude and resolve. She looked out at the faces of the people she had fought to protect, the farmers, the shopkeepers, the children who now played safely in the streets. "Thank you," she said simply. "But this isn't just about me. This was your fight too, and together, we won." The crowd erupted into quiet applause, a sense of unity and hope spreading among them. That night, as Jessica sat on the porch of her cabin with Aries beside her, her phone buzzed. She picked it up and saw a text from an unknown number. "We know what you did. This isn't over." Jessica's jaw tightened. She looked out into the forest, her mind racing. The fight for Ashwood might have ended, but the war against Victor's shadowy network was just beginning. She turned to Aries, scratching behind his ears. "Looks like we've got more work to do, boy." As the stars blinked into the night sky, Jessica felt a spark of determination. She wasn't just protecting Ashwood anymore. She was preparing to take the fight to the heart of the enemy, no matter how far it would take her.